Hello everybody, I'm Brad Mottier. I lead the business in general aviation and integrated systems businesses here at GE Aviation, and today I'm going to talk to you about lifting people up, including myself, and hopefully maybe someday you as well, if you're not already a pilot. How many pilots do we have in the crowd here? I see, yeah, we got a bunch. So a lot of this may be repetitive. You've experienced the same thing, but I kind of reinvent the future of flight every time I fly. And I fly quite a bit. Flying is a big passion in my life. It's been a passion my entire life. And flying small planes really provides a perspective of freedom that in many ways is unmatched. When I fly and I look down at the ground at our very structured life with cars on roads and gridlock, following the same path, everybody follows pretty much the same path. It looks to me a lot like a column of ants, frankly, and then when I look up, I see the big airliners packed with people. They're following the same way, and so I think about freedom, and I think about the freedom of doing things differently and living a much broader life. The general public really doesn't understand, I don't think, where you can even fly these days. Last fall, for example, a group of industry leaders, fellow GAMA board members, that's the General Aviation Manufacturers Association that GE Aviation is a part of, and we wanted a backcountry flying trip out to Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. I flew my Husky. That was the airplane you saw in the video. It's a utility aircraft that's designed for carrying a lot of weight on remote strips up in Alaska, and we spent a very exhilarating couple of days out there. I flew my airplane from Cincinnati. We did a similar trip last year out to the Sawtooth Mountains and went camping and fly fishing, that sort of thing. That first picture you saw was me landing on a road outside of Lima, Montana. That's the first time I've actually landed on a road like that. And the idea was that we were going to go have breakfast somewhere. So a group of us got in our airplanes, we flew, and on the way I programmed in Lima, Montana, thinking we're going to land at the airport. When I got there, we realized there was no airport. And so I followed the first plane in, we went and landed. I landed, we went and had a big sky breakfast. It was fantastic. And when we came out, there were a bunch of people standing around our airplanes. And so I thought it's probably best to get off the ground as soon as possible. And so this is a picture of me taking off. And then the next picture, here I am taking off off the road. And you can see that where the road kind of makes a turn there. Well, fortunately, I got off before the turn. Other people got a little closer, but they got off as well. What was fun about this trip was really experiencing flying as it was meant to be, I think. Kind of go where you want, when you want, and do what you want. This is a picture of some of the landscape that I really didn't expect to see on that trip. That little dot in the upper right corner is a Piper Super Cub, and he was flying, we were flying together. He had a naturalist in his back seat, and so as we flew out over the Moon Crater National Preserve, I didn't realize there was lava to this extent, just up on top of the ground. You normally don't see this stuff because they don't make roads through lava fields. But we landed in a kind of a remote place. You can see it there, out in the middle of nowhere. And this naturalist knew of a lava pipe that was about 15 miles long, about 30 feet in diameter, and it broke the ground at one point, so you can actually access it. So he said, let's go check this thing out. So that's what we did. We flew in and we landed. We walked about a mile and a half to the lava pipe, and I heard this hissing and rattling sound as we were walking through this little scrub brush, which I later realized were rattlesnakes and other things, so I'm glad we didn't have any problems. And then when I got into the lava pipe, it was very hot. It was maybe 110 degrees on this high plateau. And so I was very happy to get into the cool cave until they pointed out that a lot of other creatures are looking for the cool of the cave and so it's probably not the best place to hang around. But you can see that, look, general aviation can lead you to a lot of adventures, seeing landscapes and things that I didn't even know existed. But it's really more than that. It provides an opportunity, if you take hold of it, to really experience life on a broader canvas. And I learned that at a very young age. So this is a picture of my dad on the left, and we're in our one of the airplanes we had when I was growing up. And that's my mom on the right side, and my wife, Jenny, on the far right. And my parents were both World War II veterans. My dad was in the Marine Corps in the South Pacific. He was in Guam and Okinawa, some of the really very, very difficult landings. He was very fortunate that he survived. He often said that I was very lucky that he survived, otherwise I wouldn't be here, obviously. My mom was a lieutenant in the Navy. She was a wave. She was stationed in New York. They didn't go overseas. She didn't go overseas. But they really thought that they lost about 3 years of their life. And so when they came back from the war and they finished college and got married, they wanted to try to accelerate and gain back something that they felt they had lost. So they bought an airplane. This was before they even had a pilot's license. I don't think my mom had even flown at that time. But they did that because they thought that they could, if they flew, they would live their life in a wider radius from their house than if they drove. So they looked at other people and their neighbors, and their neighbors would go and drive an hour, hour and a half, 2, 3 hours, maybe 150, 200 miles. And they said, look, we want to live a broader life than that. And that was really their fundamental views of things. They felt that if you did something, anything you do, if you do it a little bit more than the average person, over time, that improvement or that reach that you do will compound itself just like compound interest rates over time. And you don't need to go for the big gold ring right off the bat, but if you just live your life a little bit more every day than the average person, you will lead a more rich life. So one of their core beliefs, really, that I took from the very beginning, and believe me, they fed it to me every single day, so this was not me learning from them. They were teaching and pounding me, is don't be average. And if you apply that law of compound interest your entire life, you will, over time, outpace the life experience of the average person. And in so doing, you're going to enrich your life and those around you. We made lots of different trips when I was growing up. We really used the airplanes as a travel tool, just like a car. And so my parents would fly 300, 400 hours a year. Every vacation centered around going someplace and doing something different. So it was really instilled in me at the very get-go to do that sort of thing. Which, this is a picture of me. I'm on my first job interview, and I flew myself to my first job interview. And I was a graduate student at the University of Illinois, and I got a phone call, and a guy asked me if I would come up and do some projects for him. He had just bought a small little company, little podunk company, really when I say small and podunk, I mean it was a nothing. But he had some engineering issues, and so he needed cheap labor. He didn't have any money, so he called me. And I told him that I would be glad to come up if he would pay for the airplane rental. And so that's what I did. And that ultimately I did a couple of projects when I was in graduate school, and then he ultimately came along and said, hey, Brad, we received a request for proposal from Teledyne for an ignition system, and I wonder if you could propose one. So, yeah, I mean, I knew nothing about ignition systems really at the time, but I went back to the university and I looked things up in the graduate library, came up with an idea and proposed it. He printed a business card with my name on it, Senior Development Engineer. I hopped on an airplane, I flew to Teledyne, I presented the ignition system proposal. They asked me all these very difficult questions. I didn't know any of the answers. It was really a bad experience. I was, personally kind of humiliated, and I said, okay, I'm done with this operation, with this endeavor working for Rick at Slick Electro. That was the name of the company. And so I went off looking for another job. Just before I was about to accept a job offer with a big name company, he called and said, I need you to come work for me. Teledyne has selected your ignition system. I said, you got a big problem if that's the case. He said, no, seriously, we really need to do this, Brad. I'll make you my partner. And that's how I got involved in Unison Industries. And it all started from saying, how about if you pay for my airplane rental, I'll fly up and see you. So you really have to seek out your passion. Along the way, I got involved, still thinking about what can we do incrementally, always moving things along. Developed a bunch of things, have some patents on some pretty interesting ignition products. And I think being a pilot and an engineer was a big advantage, certainly in this business. We also had some fun along the way. You always try to put your passion and have some fun. That airplane on the left, we wound up putting that ignition system on the right, the little box there called Lazar. That was the first digital engine control ever certified on a piston engine aircraft. That's one of the patented inventions that I have. We put that on that little yellow airplane. We had put our regular ignition system on there. He was trying to set some altitude, time to climb records, and couldn't make it. He got up to about 23,000 feet. Everything kind of went out. Airplane wouldn't climb anymore. He was leaning, the engine was running so lean, he needed a much longer, bigger, fatter spark. I said, I don't know how we can do that. We'll just program this new thing we were developing in the lab. Went out, put it on the airplane. Hoot Gibson, the shuttle pilot, actually flew the airplane on that record attempt. And he not only went through 23,000 feet, he went to like 28,000 feet, set all kinds of records. So that was a lot of fun along the way. And this is the Voyager. This is the aircraft that flew around the world nonstop, non-refueled. And those engines had ignition systems that I designed, I was involved in. And the interesting story about this one is that during the development process, the development of the aircraft, they were doing these trial flights. They did a 10,000-mile flight before they went around the globe. And in the process of one of those later flights, one of the propeller blades came off, which introduced a lot of vibration to the engine. They made it back, they landed, because there's an engine on the front and the back. They came back, but then Dick Rutan said, look, I'm not going on this flight until these engines are rebuilt, and I want new ignition systems on these things. Well, the ignition systems that we had put on there originally for them were special. They had all mean tolerances. They'd all been tweaked. We'd run them in, spent all kinds of time making sure that everything was right, that it could make it the whole way without any adjustments, et cetera. But we didn't have those anymore. We didn't have any of those spare parts. So I went back, and they needed these things like right now. So I went back to the shipping department, took 2 stock units off the shelf, brought them up, ran them, tweaked them in, said this is as good as they're going to get, put them on, shipped them out. So they actually did the world record flight on standard stock ignition systems that we took off the shelf, which I think is kind of cool. I think that GE Aviation, though, I mean, I'm like the kid in the candy store now. There's only so much you can do in a company, privately owned, small, but when you're at GE Aviation, you have all this technology. So it's inspiring because there's even more that you can do. One of the things, I have the privilege of representing the industry in what's called FAR Part 23. That's a major rewrite of the rules for how you certify aircraft, make it much simpler, faster, less expensive. And that's earlier this year in, I guess it was maybe January or February, the FAA rolled this out, and a big announcement. That's Administrator Huerta, who's a great guy there. Gave me an opportunity to say a few words. You know, GE Aviation is making huge strides. And in the BGA industry with GE, Honda, and Passport, and ATP, and H-80, we just flew the electronic engine propeller control system. Customers flew it for the first time last week. Worked fantastic. Our power distribution business. So I'm able to carry on some of my passion, even on the bigger stuff. Our mission is really to take the technology of GE Aviation from the GE store and apply that wherever we can. Sometimes we can make big improvements. Sometimes it's just that incremental compounding effect that we can do over time. There are really no limitations, though. You know, with FastWorks, take a FastWorks to flying, keep iterating over time. I don't know if I can make, you know, a pilot out of all of you. It has been a major part of my life and my family's life. I feel that it really kind of gives you that, you know, we all live in 3 dimensions, really. You know, X and Y. We don't go Z very well by ourselves, but we have time. But when you fly, you really have 4, because you now have the vertical, you can go anywhere you want. So like I said, I don't know if anybody is inspired to be a pilot. I certainly encourage you to do it. But really, it's be inspired, find your passion, and be inspired in whatever you do. If you can bring that to work, like I do every day, that's even better. So combine your passion with your work, if you can, and do things quickly and simply. Really no limitations, mindset, just go out and do it. And as my dad would always say, you know, don't be average. You don't want to end this world saying, yeah, I was a good average player. I mean, I was pretty good at being average. You want to do more. And so airplane or not, don't be average. Find your passion and run with it. And over time, you'll accumulate more life experiences and lead a much richer life. Obviously, I survived all my hair-raising moments, right? Either through luck or skill. I've had a bunch of them, most of them probably flying with my father. But I had one, I'll tell you two. I'll tell you two quickly. So one of them was I was flying back. I had the privilege of flying myself on business when we were a small private company. We had very few people. So starting out as the only engineer, and then you design something, so somebody has to go sell it. So who knows something about a technical product to sell? It's the engineer. So I went from designing to selling to marketing, et cetera. So I flew to customers. So I was flying back from Lycoming out in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, back to Rockford, Illinois. And as I'm flying along, I'm in a Mooney 201. It has weather radar. It's really a beautiful airplane. And I'm kind of looking at those thunderstorms way off in the distance. You want to keep your 20+ mile separation. I'm good. I'm talking air traffic control. And all of a sudden, and this is at night, by the way, all of a sudden, kabang! And I was hit by lightning, which then blew out everything in the airplane except that ignition system. Kept going, just like it was supposed to. And so now here I am up at night, and so the first thing you do is you kind of pinch yourself to make sure, okay, is this real? And then all the circuit breakers popped, so I started putting things in. But there was so much static electricity, it actually hit just above my head. There was a door latch on the outside of the airplane, and the lightning hit the door latch. And so the static electricity in the plane, I mean, your hair just stood up. I mean, you could feel it. You could feel it. So it took a while for that static to dissipate. And ultimately, I was able to get all the systems back up except for the radar. Radar, I mean, the cathode ray tube was probably blown or something. It never came back. So that was kind of a hairy one. I had an in-flight fire, but I didn't know it. So I'm flying along and kind of smell something. I wonder what that is. Well, kind of worked the controls a little bit, the vents and everything. It kind of went away, or maybe I got used to it. So I came in, I landed, and I taxi up to the FBO, and I have my head down, looking at my checklist, going through all the shutdown of everything. I have the little storm window. There's a little window on the side. It's called a storm window, that if everything's iced up, you supposedly can look through this little window and land. So I have my storm window open just for ventilation. And I hear this guy yell, "My God, there's an airplane on fire!" And so I look up to see what poor person is having a fire, and the flame is just billowing out of the airplane, out of the engine. And so I was the one on fire. And so I opened the door, I ran, and they came with a fire extinguisher and put it out. So that was, but I didn't know it was a problem until I landed. I sensed something was wrong, but when you were flying, there was enough wind blowing that it kept it just as a little smolder. Well, certainly to be prepared, right? And not to panic, right? I mean, if you're in an airplane and you got altitude, you're in good shape, right? You can at least glide somewhere. I mean, everybody probably knows I had an off-field landing. I had an engine failure. I had to land. So that was here 2 years ago. But I was prepared. I knew how to fly the plane, how to land slowly, where to go, what to do, and I walked away with not even a bruise, nothing. And the airplane has been repaired. It's back up in the air. I sold the plane, but another guy's fixed it up and it's back up there. So I think the main thing is just takes a lot of training. You know, just keep up on your currency, your training. But you know, flying is not that hard. And it's a lot easier today than it was when I got my license. So I got my instrument rating in almost 40 years ago. Yeah, almost 40 years ago. Back in those days, you know, there was a lot of coordinated, you had to be really coordinated in where you're looking at your instruments and how you're adjusting the radios and where you're trimming and all that sort of stuff. Today, with the digital cockpits and autopilots, it is so easy to fly safely, much, much easier than it was years ago. So it still takes training, but a different type of training, and now you have to know how to operate the radios, which can be pretty complicated sometimes. But you just have to be, it's like anything, you've just got to be prepared and practice. Well, you take an H-80, for example, that we sell for $400,000. Well, it takes a lot of those to make a GE 90, right? So your dollar volume is much less, but there are a lot of small engines. I mean, Pratt has produced 50,000 PT6s. We've actually, between Walter and us, we've actually produced almost 6,000 H-80 Walter-based engines. Not H-80s, I'm just talking about the full production run. But there are, you have Williams produces small engines. We compete with them with the GE Honda engine. The Honda jet, by the way, is flying, and they just delivered serial number 52, I think, something like that. They're doing about 50 a year, so pretty much one a week delivery. And it's projected that that airplane is going to capture about 65% of the very light jet market. So we're on the right platform. So they go from very small engines down in the 1,500, 1,600 pound thrust range, up to our Passport is the largest purpose-built. That's 18,925 pounds of thrust. But there are a lot of different engine models, which is one of the challenges that we have, because no one customer can typically guarantee enough revenue to justify building an airplane, building an engine. So you have to design your engines for multiple applications. They cannot be so point specific like they can on the commercial engine. I first went to Oshkosh in like 1974, 1975, and I've missed one Oshkosh. I missed one. And I flew in there with my parents for years and years, and then I started flying in myself. Oshkosh is an absolute thrill. At any one point in time, there are like 8,000 airplanes on the field. It's very hectic when you're flying in. You actually fly to a water tower, which is about 30 miles outside of Oshkosh, and you form a conga line at a certain speed and altitude, depending on what type of plane you're flying, and you follow visually the guy in front of you. And you don't speak on the radio, but you have your radio on, and there are spotters on the ground that look up and see, yellow high wing airplane. If you hear me, rock your wings, and so you rock your wings so that they know that you can hear them. And then they tell you which road to follow, to which runway, but you don't speak at all. And your eye is on your head's on a swivel, because airplanes are coming in from every place to that water tower, right? Some of them are faster, some of them are slower. And then when you land, they have a dot. On the video you probably saw, I landed on a green dot. And they have these dots along the runway so that they tell you where to land on the runway. You don't land up at the end like you do in a commercial airline. They may tell you land on the green dot, which may be halfway down the runway. They do that so that you can fly there so they can bring somebody else in right behind you. And I've been to Oshkosh where I landed on the first dot and told to hold short, and then a guy came in right over the top. He landed on his dot, and another one landed on the other dot down. So you have to be kind of on your game, I would say, when you're going in there, but it's a thrill, and then just to be part of that. It's the busiest airport in the world for that week.